So in this one, I want to talk about something that might be a little more incendiary with regard to this topic than my previous videos. So in this one, I want to talk about, is Microsoft actually abusing their position in the market with regards to the forced Windows 11 updates, forcibly preventing new hardware, or I'm sorry, older hardware. And we're not talking ancient hardware. We're talking hardware that I mean, hardware that was really high end in some cases just a couple of years ago. Um, Stuff that really shouldn't be on the chopping block. And hardware lasts longer than it did before as well. I mean, there was a time when hardware didn't last as long as it did today. So we're talking about whether or not preventing people from running the current Windows OS on their older hardware is abuse of Microsoft's market position. Now, I will be clear, I'm not suggesting that this is a monopoly. No one can look at this in good faith and say Microsoft has a monopoly. I mean, they have a monopoly on Microsoft Windows because it's their product, but there are alternatives to Microsoft Windows. There is Mac OS. There's Linux. There is, I thought there was at least one more, but there are at least two solid alternatives. What I'm talking about is it just abuse of the market position? So I would argue in some ways yes, and the reason I would argue that is that so if Microsoft hadn't developed Windows in the way that they had without implementing these types of restrictions. See, Microsoft, the reason why people always used Windows instead of Mac OS is because people that used Windows generally didn't want the kind of restrictions that you get with Mac OS. People didn't want a closed ecosystem. That's not what people bought Windows for. So for what, decades, Windows 95 through Windows 10, basically, we've had a more or less open ecosystem with, to the best of my knowledge, no hard blocks. Like Windows 11, there is a hard block. There is an arbitrary block in that OS that we all know full well has nothing to do with absolute necessities of the operating system. We all know that it would work without that. Anyone comes on this video and tries to comment otherwise, you're gonna get shouted down if there's many people in the comments. I'm not even gonna have to do it. Too many people have used Windows 11 on non-supported hardware with various workarounds and hacks and what have you for somebody with a straight face in good faith to say it needs 8th gen or newer, it needs TPM 2.0 or newer. These were put in place to force upgrades. My opinion is because hardware is not obsoleting at a rate that Microsoft is happy with. Hardware is literally lasting too long. It used to be every couple of years a computer physically didn't last, so you'd have to replace your computer. Or at the very least, like you'd get a year or two, then you'd have to do a Windows install, and then a year or two after that, your computer would be too slow to effectively run the new OS. That is not the case anymore. To be honest, if there weren't restrictions, I've run Windows 10 on first gen i7s, like fast ones, like the fast 6-core ones, but that hardware is readily available. It shouldn't have any value. That should be hardware you could get for free now. It's so old. But a lot of that hardware is, if there weren't arbitrary restrictions in place, a lot of that hardware would actually be functional, more so than people think, to be honest. So my argument is also that, so had Windows not been built on that foundation, on the foundation of an open operating system that anyone can more or less do anything on within reason, it wouldn't have developed to where it is. Particularly, I think the phrase is opportunity cost. I'm not positive with that. I think that's the phrase. The fact that nobody put the time in. So what about Linux? Okay, so the argument we've made with Linux and in the discussion is that, well, somebody can't just switch over to Linux. A lot of people say just switch to Linux. That's not a viable argument. It's not a viable argument because of software development having not taken place. So had Windows been on a trajectory of closed operating system for the past, say, I don't know, let's say 2000, what are we at now? 2024, about 2025, it's 2015. So let's say towards the beginning of the Windows 10 era, Microsoft had started put in place the groundwork of an obviously closed ecosystem. Well, perhaps then people would have put more time and effort into, maybe we should do more development for Linux. Maybe we should learn how to use Linux. But now what has happened is that they waited until everyone was in the perfect position and didn't truly have an alternative that was viable to then force the stuff down everybody's throats. And that is my argument as far as how it's an abuse of their market position. Again, it's not a monopoly thing. It's that things that would have happened had everyone known that Microsoft was going to start closing things off, development didn't take place. And that's years of development that's basically lost that didn't take place. So now, let's say we start today. Let's say everyone gets serious about assuming that we need to switch to Linux today. Okay, it's going to take realistically years. Some stuff can be done, some stuff can't. So then there has to be enough outcry from people to say, okay, this is a capability that we want. I don't know. Choose some random thing. I want to do video encoding with Adobe Premiere on my Linux system. Can I do that? I'm pretty sure I can't do that right now. And the only thing that's going to make that happen is if a large enough people want it to happen, where that's just too big of a market for Adobe to say, nah, we're going to ignore that. Same thing with like mainstream games. So to the best of my knowledge, I don't know if any AAA mainstream games are actually Linux native. You have to do various different stuff to make it work. I don't know how deep it goes, but you don't just load Cyberpunk 2077 on your Linux box and call it a day, right? You got to have the, I don't know what you call it, wine or whatever. You got to have some sort of like compatibility stuff going on. What if there were enough users just straight up on Linux and it was a massive market? CD Projekt Red would say, there's too many people here that are begging us for this. We can't miss out on this market. So I think it constitutes abuse of their market position. Again, what it comes down to is that they waited until people weren't in a position to do anything about it and then sprung it on us. So, I mean, you tell me, what's abusive market share? So maybe if we're lucky, I mean, it seems like I wish, I'm not a fan of the way they do everything in Europe. So I really wish it didn't come down to this, but maybe it's going to come down to, like somebody else commented on this, maybe it's going to come down to the European Union saying you have to make it compatible and otherwise you don't get our market. You can't sell Windows in our market, That happened, I think that's what happened with the iPhone getting USB-C. I'm pretty sure that's all that caused that. So anyway, I hope this is kind of thought-provoking for people and gives you something to think about, and maybe tells you somebody else feels the same way that you do about this stuff. So anyway, thanks for watching the video.